Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 12th of December 2011. My name is Totalbiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. You can email in mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, and that's mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, with topics for future shows. The game in the background is Anno 2070, the first mission of it. I actually really like the Anno games. I spent a lot of time with Anno 1701. I would have liked to have played more of 1404, but I didn't really have the time to do so, and this one, 2070, is, of course, set in the future, and it's looking pretty solid, honestly. It was bewildering for a second, then I realised, oh, everything seems to be the same as the old Anno game, so I might do a video of it later on once I've got to grips with it. First email comes in from Bruno that says, in regards to the whole discussion spawned by the Red Cross article, you used the term, oh god, think of the children, and it made me think of a lack of responsibility on the parents' part. As an example, I just sold Modern Warfare 3, because it's a pretty bad game, and Bulletstorm to a colleague of mine. Before buying, he asked me if these games would be appropriate for an 11-year-old boy, and I had to point out that the age rating on both games is 18+, but he didn't seem to care. This kind of thing makes me really angry because I'm an old gamer, 37 years old, and I've been playing video games most of my life, and I'm very tired of, oh god, think of the children. I mean, if people are really serious about this statement, how about taking a quick look at the age rating of the games and think, oh, there's a lot of violence, maybe my 11-year-old son shouldn't be playing this. I'm old enough to make my own decisions, but the children are not. When a parent's going to wake up and realise that they need to know what their children are doing, at least enough to make these kind of decisions on behalf of their kids. Well, before we go on with this topic, I'd like to point out that the Red Cross has clarified the nonsense surrounding the whole issue and pointed out that the media basically blew it completely out of proportion, and I've linked to the clarification in the description below this video. The British Red Cross actually got in touch with me directly after the incident and the video to provide some clarification, so thank you very much to them. Rather unfortunate that the media decided to take it completely out of proportion, distorting the facts and causing such a goddamn mess. And quite frankly, the Daily Mail and News.au, which were the two sites that I saw which published this article, should be ashamed of themselves for causing defamation to a charity. My God! Seriously, I have real problems with British newspapers, I might add, and the Daily Mail would be the first against the wall when the revolution came if I had anything to say about it. Disgraceful rag of a paper that it is. My God, I wish it was dead and buried. Oh well, eventually it will be, once this particular older generation dies off and the more sensible younger generation realises that the paper's full of crap. I think they already know that, but unfortunately the 40 to 70-somethings are still reading the damn thing. Anyway, shall we get back to what we were talking about? Yes, age ratings are an interesting discussion, aren't they? Because for the most part, you're seeing in a lot of countries that the age ratings are not mandatory. They're not legally enforceable. Now, in the UK, there's an organisation called the BBFC who are responsible for rating films and things like that. They also rate games every now and again. Admittedly, a lot of that has been taken over by PEGI, who are not legally enforceable unless something has changed in the last few years. I mean, I used to, what was it, back in 2005, I used to work for Game, and it was a case of if we knowingly sold a BBFC-rated game to a minor, we could be fined, we could, of course, be fired, the store would be fined. There was even, I think, jail time involved in it, so it was pretty damn serious at that point. But whatever the case, the PEGI ratings are not legally enforceable. I'm pretty sure the stuff over in the US isn't legally enforceable either. But the problem is, it doesn't matter if it's legally enforceable or not, because a parent can very easily buy it, and then you can't refuse to sell it to that parent. They're old enough to buy it, and then what they do after that is entirely up to them. And I think that's okay. The problem being that you can't necessarily trust parents to properly, not so much even discipline their kids, but probably take care of their kids. I mean, you use the television, you use consoles as a glorified nanny. That's what it is. It's a babysitter. You can't put your kids in front of an electronic console or a television and expect them just to behave. And more to the point, think about the influence that might be having. It's not even just the case of, oh, it will turn them into psychopathic killers. No. But they may get some ideas that aren't perhaps so great. I mean, you know for a fact, if you've ever been on Xbox Live, that there are a large number of screaming kidiots, as I like to call them, that have headsets that just scream obscenities down there, and it's like, that is incredibly bad behaviour that should be punished, and yet it's not, because it's easier just to get the kids out of the way by doing that, which makes me scratch my head, I have to say. Why have kids if you're not willing to spend time with them? Oh, wait, probably wasn't by choice. Foolish, foolish people. Interestingly, on the two games that you gave there, I would actually say that Bulletstorm is significantly worse. I mean, for one, it's got about 5,000 cock jokes in it, and for two, there's a lot of damn decapitation and sexual references in there as well. It's actually way, way more violent than Call of Duty. You don't have people being blown to bits in Call of Duty in the same way that you do in, say, Bulletstorm. Heads come off, limbs come off. It's pretty brutal. Right? You can shoot people in the dick in that game, and you are rewarded for doing so. So, yeah, that's probably not ideal, even though it is somewhat cartoony in its execution. I mean, what is there even to say about it, honestly? Yes, parental responsibility is the most vital part of bringing up a kid, and choosing what media to expose them to is also important. Now, my personal opinion is that exposing a kid to potentially violent material is okay as long as you are there to accompany them through it and make sure that they know that this is a fantasy. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I think, let's see, when I was 6 years old, I was given tapes of The Lord of the Rings, the BBC radio play version. Now, that was some scary shiz right there. Seriously, I was terrified by that. And there's a lot of violence in Lord of the Rings. I mean, for God's sake, thousands upon thousands of people die. Innocents are massacred in that series of books. And it is not a nice series of books. It's certainly not for kids either, but my parents were there to say, you know, look, this is a fantasy, and I think that it's valuable for you to read it and, of course, listen to the radio play and things like that, because it's a really, really good story, and, of course, it was. So I think it's entirely okay for that. You know, I saw Terminator when I was 10, I think. That was okay. That didn't turn me into a bloodthirsty killer, didn't give me any bad ideas either, but what we're talking about here is sustained exposure to adult games, adult themes, and I think perhaps the most vital thing, this is the thing that blows all of that out the water in terms of importance, exposure to adults online in a completely unguarded fashion. That's the most dangerous thing, because God knows how many kids get manipulated in that respect, and you've heard the hysteria surrounding the idea of, once again, someone please think of the children, pedophilia and things like that, but it can happen. And honestly, I think that's the thing that the parents should be most concerned about, is kind of policing what their kids are doing on the internet and who they're actually connecting with on the net. That, to me, seems the most potentially damaging. Blowing up some virtual character and having their pixels fly all over the screen is far, far less relevant than connecting with a potentially manipulative adult over the internet without any supervision. That seems bad to me. So I wish they could just focus on that instead. I think that's certainly more important than the idea of, oh, this game will turn us into psychopathic killers, when there's clearly absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. This email comes in from Revelus that says, what is a good way to go about explaining eSports to somebody? I'm very passionate about playing games such as StarCraft 2, but I have difficulty explaining why I love them to people who have no background of what I'm talking about. It's incredible seeing people such as yourself in Day 9 who love what they do and stand behind the growing phenomenon. As a gamer I respect, I was wondering if you couldn't enlighten me as to how I can try to get someone into eSports without seeming pushy about it or over-enthusiastic. I understand that I can't make everyone like what I like, but it's frustrating to be looked down upon without being able to do so little as let them know what I'm talking about. To be specific, one of my key problems is explaining the appeal in watching other people play a computer game. Many become dazed and confused at the idea of playing games for money in the first place, often giving a blank expression of the thought of it, yet analogies to sports such as football and tennis fall upon deaf ears. While I'm sure I can think of a few other 1,000 ways to ask the same question, I would love to hear your answer. It's a tricky one because gaming hasn't really been around for long enough for people to take it seriously in any kind of competitive aspect. The problem is that gaming is viewed as a toy, yeah? And it's viewed as a toy by even this generation as well. That's kind of the weirdest thing as well. You try and explain esports to people of this generation, it's still pretty damn hard. And honestly, I found older people more receptive to the idea, usually because I'll break out analogies such as chess and darts, yeah? You can't compare it to football, that's stupid. The reason is because they're too unalike. You're talking about a sport which has 22 men on a field kicking a ball around. The physical aspect is very, very obvious right there. You're talking about everything being completely manual. The electronics just don't even come into it for the players. And then you try and compare that to StarCraft 2? Who the hell's going to listen to you if you do that? Nobody. You've got to bring in something that's a little closer. And Darts is a good example. Darts is a good example because it is a sport that really requires no physical exertion whatsoever. That sport relies entirely on accuracy. That's what it's all about. It's just about accuracy. And also, you're talking about people playing it that are nowhere near athletic. Right? You've seen darts players, maybe you haven't. Certainly anyone in the UK has seen darts players. Darts is quite popular here. It's televised, and of course, it's a very popular pub sport. And darts guys generally aren't all that athletic, honestly. They've usually got beer guts, but they are extremely skilled at what they do. That's a good comparison, especially with barcraft, for instance, because both barcraft and darts very much based around going to the pub, having a drink, and watching this particular sport and getting rowdy. And there are comparisons to be drawn there. So you compare a darts game to barcraft, for instance, show people a video of that, and I think they'll get a better idea. Chess, I think, is perhaps the best way to do it, because while chess is considered boring by a lot of people, they still respect chess. The idea of being a grandmaster chess player, that's still impressive to people. And that is a sport which requires absolutely no athleticism of any description. It is all about strategy. Now, StarCraft is all about strategy, but it's also all about speed and accuracy as well. So you combine the two. Darts is about accuracy, and chess is about strategy. StarCraft's about both of those things. And they might say, but it's on a computer, so it can't be a sport. Well, then you turn around and say, well, you can play chess on a computer, and it doesn't make a blind bit of difference if you're playing it on a computer or a board. There's no physical difference there. Talk about card games, for example. Talk about poker. Talk about online poker. Extremely viable way of making money, extremely popular. Millions upon millions of people play it in the countries that aren't absolutely retarded and ban it for no particular reason. Is that a less valid form of poker? Not really. It's different. There's no doubt about that. The strategy and the metagaming behind online poker is different to poker in real life. The differences are fairly obvious there. But it's still a valid way of playing it. The thing about sports is that sports extend beyond the obvious ones. There are a lot of sports. A lot of sports. You ever watch the Olympics, you will see how many sports there are. The Winter Olympics as well. You have a number of sports there that are not as athletic as you might expect. There's things like archery, there's things like shooting. Those are not athletic, they require accuracy. Athleticism doesn't really come into it, per se. Separating the idea that a sport has to require a lot of physical exertion is perhaps the most important part of explaining what an esport actually is, and getting people to realize that, yes, it is actually a sport, it is a competitive game that is played for money, and it does require a large degree of skill in order to make that work. Because a lot of people have in their heads that it's got to be a big physical exertion in order to be a sport. And while there is physical exertion involved in StarCraft, it's not as obvious and perhaps nowhere near as much as running up and down a field for 90 minutes, regardless of the fact that you may have to play 10 hours worth of games at MLG or whatever. Unfortunately, it's very easy for people to look down on things that they don't understand. And the age-old axiom is, of course, that people fear what they do not understand. And they often mask that fear with mockery. It's fairly common, honestly. I remember when I used to game when I was in school, gaming was nowhere near as popular back then, especially computer gaming. Sure, some people had consoles, but gaming on a computer? No. That just didn't really happen, and as a result, you were, of course, labeled a nerd and a geek, whereas now gaming, it's ubiquitous in schools, and everyone plays on a console or Call of Duty, but PCs are still common as well, and it's not considered so much of a nerdy activity anymore. But back then, of course, people feared and laughed at what they didn't understand, and eventually things will move away from that, and eventually people will understand it if esports continues to grow larger and larger, and barcrafts continue to pop up all over the place. People will get curious, and people will eventually start to accept it. But I think you've got to understand one thing, is that a lot of people just don't want to accept that. They don't want to open their minds to these kind of things, and it's not really relevant if they do or don't. We don't need to recruit followers to this. It grows organically. People learn to like it because they stumble across it, or they're brought into it in a very subtle way. They're not dragged into it. They're not browbeaten into it. And let's be honest, why the hell do you care what they think about your hobbies? Why should you? There's literally no reason to. They have no effect on your life in that respect. They don't have any right to dictate what you like and don't like. It's so incredibly subjective, and once again, life is too short to be worrying about such things. Enjoy what you like, as it is your life, and don't worry about what other people think of it. And if those people that are mocking you for it are considered to be your friends and are doing it beyond the usual friendly ribbing that is to be expected amongst groups of friends, then I would strongly suggest you find new friends with more open minds and perhaps less need to condemn, because I tend to find that people like that are extremely insecure inside, and that's why they tend to mock others. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Mailbox. Remember to email in mailbox@cynicalbrit.com with topics for future shows, and I will see you next time.